Why, hello, learning nerds. Before we begin today's show, I want to thank our awesome sponsors, with first giving a shout out to Idle Courses Academy. Idle Academy is the first and only authorized vocational school for instructional design and online learning. It includes a comprehensive hands-on curriculum with certifications, credentials, expert coaches, mentors, a community of practice, paid experience opportunities, industry-preferred software access, live events, and ongoing updates. Your entire instructional design career is neatly packaged behind a single login for just $88 a month. Check out all the details at idlecourses.com/academy, and you can use my code Luke for $88 off the yearly membership. Okay, now let's start the show. Hello, learning nerds, and welcome on in to another episode of the show. I'm your host. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I'm a senior instructional designer, program manager, author, blogger, podcaster, and instructor. And my purpose, my passion is instructional design and trying to be able to help you along your own instructional design journey. And you can find all the resources that I have for you over at drlukehobson.com. Folks, we have a special episode today. Today, we are going to be chatting with Major Elvin Fortuna. I met Elvin a couple of years ago and was so interested to hear about his work because he works as an instructional designer over at the Army University. So I wanted to be able to talk with him more about his latest publication, talking about his research and his findings all around trying to be able to modernize the U.S. Army Captain's Career Course. Very difficult to be able to say, but this is his latest project and what he did, and it was fascinating to hear more about this process, what he was finding, what was the overall conclusion, next steps, and things of that nature. So I asked him to come on the show because I wanted to hear much more about how did he modernize this learning experience for Army captains. Extremely interesting, and you're absolutely going to love this episode. It is a fantastic one. I also wanted to hear more too about, well, he is an instructional designer at the Army. What's the day in the life like for an ID over within the military? It's actually extremely interesting. So wanting to hear a little bit more about that perspective. I know it's always a challenge trying to be able to describe the day in the life, but he did so in a fantastic way. And I also wanted to be able to dive on in a little bit deeper to the fact too that usually us within the instructional design space, we often talk about higher education and we talk about corporate America. But of course, there are other sectors, and obviously one of the biggest employers is indeed the government. So talking more about how does one transition over into a type of role within either a military branch or a government agency or something along those lines, how does a person actually do this? So we break that down, talk about all of these different types of next steps. So this episode is awesome. Also, it was Elvin's first time ever doing a podcast and he crushed it. So if you have a podcast of your own and you're looking for a guest, I would highly recommend reaching out to him afterwards and connecting and being able to invite him on your show. So, hey, I'm not going to waste any more time. Here is the one and the only Major Elvin Fortuna. Elvin, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Luke.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. So, Elvin, I have a lot of questions for you. I can't wait to dive on in. But before I get ahead of myself with everything, can you please just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what it is that you do.
Perfect. Yeah, my name is Elvin Fortuna. I'm a major in the United States Army. I'm a instructional designer at Army University at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And I'm also a PhD student at Michigan State University studying educational technology and educational psychology. So that's the short version for you. Happy to give you the long version if you want.
No, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. Actually, it's going to be my follow-up question. So now, because now I want to ask you. So first and foremost, obviously, thank you so much for your service and everything that you have done. So I know from our time together, because the first time I met you was actually through EduFlow, and I believe it was with the class about collaborating and building relationships for subject matter experts. I think that was the first time that we met. Because I know you took a few different things with EduFlow, so I think that was the first time. But I realized with doing the research for this episode that I did not know about your entire history. I knew that you were over at the Army University, but looking into it, I was like, wait a second, he taught military science at Gonzaga, and obviously you've done your time in your service. So how did you go from serviceman to classroom to then designer? How did that process work?
Oh boy. Yeah. So this really starts in 2007. So, and I would kind of explain it in two chunks, right? So there was service member to classroom, and classroom back to curriculum, curriculum design. So 2007, I commissioned University of Maryland as a quartermaster officer. Yeah, we have quartermasters in the Army. We do logistics, and I'm a logistics officer now. So, deployed to Operation Iraqi Freedom, deployed to Operation Enduring Freedom, and ended up commanding a company of paratroopers in the 82nd Airborne Division for a sustainment company down there. And so that was probably the first, like 8 to 10 years of my career. And about 2015, the Army decides to send me to Gonzaga University. It's Gonzaga.
Gonzaga.
Yeah.
Sorry, mispronounced.
Yep. I wouldn't be a true Spokane.
Thank you for the correction.
Individual, yeah. But it's Gonzaga. So Gonzaga Bulldogs. So I was assigned there as an assistant professor of military science for close to 3 years. And it was absolutely the most fulfilling experience I've ever had. Getting cadets commissioned so they can start their service and really kind of pointing them in the right direction. So did that for 2.5 years. And there was actually it's called the Master Educator course now, but essentially it's a collaboration the Army had with University of Louisville. And, we would use our classroom experiences plus do courses at Fort Knox, Louisville, and then online, blended learning to really, get a Master of Arts in Higher Education Administration. So did that, fell in love with the education game, like absolutely. But the Army had different plans. So, actually went to 3rd Special Forces Group, did some operations there, mostly focused on like building capability in Africa. And then, went to 18th Airborne Corps, back to what now is Fort Liberty, North Carolina. And after I've kind of climbed that necessary part of the career ladder, because we have a very linear model for our officers, I was able to choose a job, and that was kind of weird. And so had about 300, 400 jobs available I could pick, and competed, and I saw a job called training developer at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And I said, that sounds close to what I like. I like education. Training's close enough. And it turns out that job was a lot more than what the one line said. It was actually to be an instructional designer, and that's where I ended up in 2021. And that's what I do now.
I'm trying to imagine being handed a list of 400 jobs and being like, pick one. It's like when I picked my college major where I picked graphic design, and I don't know why. I still don't. I'm like, yeah, that list, sure, that one. And then I take a graphic design class, and I'm like, what did I do? Like, I'm not sure if this is right for me.
It's kind of like picking all your majors, like out of the entire catalog, and then competing for it. It's very odd system.
Yeah. Was there ever a point in a time where you're like, I'm not sure if this is what I want to do, or eventually you're like, no, I got this. I could do this.
I didn't feel unconfident, but I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
I actually remember, I think Cami Bean's book, like The Accidental Instructional Designer.
Yes.
One of the first book I picked up. I was like, oh, okay, I need to figure this thing out real fast. Let me get this book. And that's kind of what started the whole thing.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. She just released a new edition of the book, by the way. I'll have to get her on the show because I saw her posting about that the other day. So definitely. And I'll put that in the show notes too, so that way folks can go and check more about Cami's book. But that's really interesting. So one thing, Elvin, I'm diving to ask you about, which I know is going to be really difficult to be able to answer, and I struggle with trying to answer this thing myself with doing this, but can you walk us through a day in the life of what an instructional designer does for the Army University?
I would have to describe like 5 different scenarios. So it's a really tricky question. I'm sure you posted to everyone.
Yeah.
The way I would explain it before I explain a day is each day kind of corresponds to a part of the ADDIE process. So depending on the project and your focus for the day, you might be doing more analysis or more design or more development, implementation, evaluation. It just depends on the priorities and kind of how things align in time and space, right? So, I mean, you're probably more interested in what a heavy development day would look like, because I think that's kind of what people are thinking of.
I mean, at this point, you mentioned about analysis, but it doesn't get talked about enough. So, by all means, if you want to describe a part of your analysis day of what the research actually entails and what it looks like, I'm interested in everything if I'm being honest here. But whatever you want to dive on into, please feel free.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, the great thing about working at Army University, and by the way, I'll throw this in there. I'm not speaking in the official capacity for Army University. I'm doing this in my own time right now, but I'll talk about my experiences. Is that each day is qualitatively different, right? Like that is part of the joy of the job, depending on the project or what you're working on or the problems you're trying to solve, because it really comes down to problem solving. Each day is going to be different, but some days are more similar than others. That being said, what does a typical day look like? Well, I'll start with analysis. So a day that I would say is focused on analysis. So this would be a day, let's say we work on an annual cycle, right? So our curriculum gets looked at on a yearly basis. And so if it's October of this year, the beginning of the fiscal year, okay, we've just pushed out a set of courses, we are looking at evaluation data that's coming in, and we are looking at what is working and what is not working. Cool thing about working for the government is, you have a lot more time on a lot of these projects, right? So I'm working on a year cycle. It's October. I want to know before I start doing any work, like, what are we working on? What do we have? And what is working and what is not working in all the coursework we're pushing out? What that actually looks like, we'll work with some of we have an Office of Institutional Research and Assessment, and we'll work with them to pull in all SCORM reports, XAPI data if we have it, like self-report surveys, whatever, and then we're pulling all this data in, and we're just trying to get a picture of what's working or what's not working. And so that could easily take 2 to 4 weeks, all of October, and a day looks like come into office 8:30, check your notes, have your meeting, and then you're looking at the data. You're looking at what are the students saying. You're looking at what what learning outcomes have been met, kind of what interface features are having a good impact and what's not. And that seems to be easy, and that's why we gloss over it, but it's not. You got to sit down and dedicate time to it, because you have to be able to answer what parts of your courses are working, what parts of your courses are not working, where have we made progress, where have we not made progress, and why. And that causal piece is really tricky. I mean, you can kind of make it up and maybe you get away with it, but that's probably not the best way to do business. So that's an analysis day.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said all those things, by the way. No, none of that's ever easy. That's kind of funny,
Right.
that it's always this like, oh, it's easy to do. It's just like, no, because of course you're interpreting the data too, and sometimes you interpret it incorrectly. So then you have to do more research to be like, well, then why did it come out like this? And like, okay, now I need to follow. I mean, I know for me, when thinking about it from that analysis portion about everything, I do both. I do both a quantitative and a qualitative approach, because I have found that oftentimes I'll get the quantitative answers and I'll know about at least 75% to say like, okay, I got it, I need to go in this direction. But then there's that 25% where I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I'm just going to be guessing. So can I now bring in some people as far as for focus groups and interviews and whatnot, or for observation, whatever it is, to be able to say like, okay, how can I really go and take this to that next step? So that makes sense about it from an analysis perspective. Actually, I'm really curious. How do you conduct with evaluations? You mentioned about that, but you're going to be taking in evaluations and everything. How do you do evaluations? Do you do typical things as far as with the surveys and with everything else, or do you do more with things for as far as interviewing your past students or from instructors, or how do you do that?
It'll depend on the project and what resources we have available. For our captain's career coursework, which we do invest a lot of work in, we'll do a few things. So easy stuff, pull your data from the learning management system that you can, and then embedded surveys within the course. That's easy, low hanging fruit, like Kirkpatrick, probably level 1 and level 2 stuff. And then from there, we're sending researchers out to like the schoolhouses, because we have the added benefit of the learners are going through a phased model. So we know that at some point we will have them physically available at a school and Army installation. And so because of that, we're fortunate enough to send researchers and say, okay, you took this class 3 months ago. Let's get you in a focus group. What are you working on? What are you not working on? That, because you're it's still a gap. You didn't really transfer it. Things like that. So we because we're structured, the follow-up is relatively easy for us as long as we put the money towards it. And so it's the quantitative stuff from the LMS plus the qualitative stuff. And plus we do like a biannual, called the Survey of the Army Learning Enterprise. And that gets us some more macro level, are you using it in your job, like Kirkpatrick level 4 type of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. Oh, that's really good to hear. It always is so amazing when you hear from students and they give their testimonies and they say wow, I'm actually using this for my work in the real world. I'm like, yeah, good. That's the point.
Right.
It's just students have gotten to the point now, and any student, I'm just talking in general here, but any student, it seems like they're always so surprised when a training or a type of a course or a program is so impactful that it did what it was supposed to do. Which is unfortunate. It's just well, no, it's the point of our jobs. It's to be able to help you take that next step, not to just be yeah, check mark, let's move on to the next kind of thing, which, that training does exist, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of yeah. So it's always so interesting to be able to hear that. You talked about this a little bit, and I really want to kind of dive in deep now about this, because this is what made me think about inviting you onto the podcast. When I was reading more from your LinkedIn profile, is that you mentioned about a recent publication with one of your articles that was called Modernizing the U.S. Army's Captain's Career Course. I really want to learn more about this. So I want to make sure that first I'm understanding what this course is about, because once again, I'm doing my Googling here to make sure that I am on track. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the students are actually Army captains, and you're trying to be able to help them with developing knowledge, skills, attributes, what they actually need for the real world. Is that correct?
Yes, I'll kind of expand on it a little bit.
Go into more detail.
I mean, that's great. It's actually split into 2 parts, right? So, context. So Army captains, active duty Army, a little less than 500,000 people. Of those, you're talking probably, depending on the size of the Army, 5 to 10K per year going on these online courses and doing mandated educational activities. This is part of the professional military education. 2 phases. So where we're at right now is, before we modernize, there's a common core, which is those knowledge, skills, and abilities that every captain needs to know, right? But all the captains are in different specialties, right? One's a logistician, one's an infantryman, one is an engineer, the other one's a research analyst or nuclear engineer. There's a whole lot of specialties. So they have to get education on their specialty. So when we talked about modernizing, it kind of became this shell game of what can we use as technology to kind of hit everyone that has these commonalities, so that we can kind of best use the time in the classroom so that they can focus on their specialties and kind of higher level, cognitive type tasks.
So what was it before, with a structure, before this idea of trying to be able to modernize it? What did it look like? What was version 1.0?
Version 1.0.
Don't go all the way back. I'm sure it's going to be way before. Please forget I said that. Whatever is the old version.
No, it's appropriate. Version 1.0 is, you take West Point, you take all these schools, a lot of these schools are over 200 years old. There's a tradition and a history to them. So you can't just go in there and say, we're going to change the world tomorrow. It's organizations have some inertia and some conservatism because things have worked in the past, right? So we talk about the maneuver school, the U.S. Army School of Infantry, that is a very, very old institution, and you're talking version 96, But what it was in 2019, 2020 is if you're in the active duty Army, not the case for the reserves, they have a slightly different thing, but active duty, the officers would get orders. They would be hey, you're going to 9 months to Fort wherever it is, Fort Moore, Fort Cavazos, Fort whatever. And then you're going to go in the classroom and sit in that classroom with this small group or this large group for 9 months, period. Technology equals You're going to go on Blackboard if you need to, and here's your slides and here's the simulations. But it was primarily a face-to-face experience.
Okay. Okay. Now that makes sense. So going from there is that when you were talking about the article, you were talking about what actually happens during the modernization process. And you mentioned about that. And then that term really spoke to me as someone who's worked in academia for so long. But there's always like these shiny bells and whistles that like people make it out to be some type of like magical thing. And you're like, cool. But what actually happens? Like, put aside this crazy white paper that discusses about the theory and the everything. Like, what's the real world here? What actually happens inside of there? And you mentioned about that. So I'm curious, what actually did happen when you were trying to modernize an important course like this?
Yeah, we have an academic term we call sausage making. But that's really
Very
what
academic.
happens. Yeah, very academic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, you as a learning community, right? Like I'm the vice provost of academic affairs. I got all these great ideas for what we want to do. We got a project team, we've got a full bird that's ready to change the world. And you come up to reality. And reality is that there are trade-offs. The SMEs think something, like your budget office thinks something else, and you are one of so many priorities, particularly in the Army, which is like it's a huge organization. It's like a 800 billion plus like allocation of money from Congress. Like it's nuts how big the organization is. And so your idea of what you think is going to happen is going to, as you go through these planning teams, is going to change. And I can kind of give you a concrete example of that. Sure. So it was about 2020, end of 2020, early 2021, we started having planning teams. We call them operational planning teams. And we just basically put, the designers, the educational, community with the enterprise resource people and the senior leaders and all the stakeholders. And we just try to say, look, this is what General Rainey or whoever the general is today told us. This is our mandate. Like, get to here. They want to modernize this course. Modernize being make it state of the art. State of the art being fill in the blank, but like we got to do something because that's what the boss told us to do. And you're basically pitching, and this is what happened in the operational planning teams. We had about 6 sessions over about 6-7 months. The educational people will say, here's what we think. We're going to give everyone, in this case, the initial going idea was we want to give everyone a tailored, individual, choose your own adventure approach to doing this thing. Instead of going to the classroom for 9 months, what if student A could, take this part online, then go in for 3 weeks and then do the other, like a very tailored instructional model. Student B elects to go to the class, full-time in person, have at it. Student C wants to do it all online except, the last 2 months. That was kind of the original vision. And when we put all the people that knew all the specifics about those areas, travel, budget, law, all that, we ran into some hard walls. Some of them we can jump through, getting resourcing for some online activities and learning activities. Some of them you can't, there's some legal things that prevent me from mandating that a military learner, go in person and another person can't because they're choosing, there's some equivalency problems there that in the military side, we actually can't unless Congress actually gives us some authority to change the joint travel regulations. And so you're like, well, why would someone outside the military care about that? Well, organizations are still the same, right? Like you can't design instruction in a vacuum. Everything is in context. And if you don't understand that context, then the context is going to change what you thought was going to happen and turn into something that you may not even have wished for. We were able to control it because we knew off the bat that the end state was going to look a little different than the initial vision. But we got something that we're proud of.
That is really interesting to think about, by the way, of your stakeholders, including Congress, that it's everybody, it never would have thought about that before until you said it like that. I was just like, Oh yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense because when we're thinking about like your SMEs, I can picture as far as for who your SMEs are going to be based around even some of my own experiences with doing things. But when thinking about all the other individual stakeholders and groups of stakeholders who you have to be able to go through and jump through different hoops, as you said, to be able to get things to pass by. So, what are some of the common challenges that you have to go through besides? That, like what else was preventing you from trying to be able to do a few different things of that nature?
Well, time. So like everyone wants, urgency of change. Like we want to modernize tomorrow. We want to get it. Want to ship the product like next week. Like there's always this like tension, right, between like deliverables and getting it done quick, and then doing it right and quality. And there's a certain point where when you're at a meeting, like there's a trade-off. It's like, do you want it now, or do you want it right, or are you okay with mediocrity in the middle, right? Like you can't have both at the same time, unless you have extraordinary resources. And I'm playing with taxpayer money, so I can't. I got to be very, very deliberate about what I do with that money, right?
Right. That makes sense. Have you heard about the joke that most organizations leave the A and D out of ADDIE, just leave the products to die?
That's a good one.
Carl Kopp told me that one, and I'm like, oh yeah, that can happen. Not for all of them. Don't get me wrong, but definitely there's some are like, oh, we won it yesterday. I'm like, it's not going to be good.
Not going to happen.
It's just but it makes sense. It certainly does align too for everything that you were doing. You mentioned too about the blended learning approach, which I feel is going to become more normal with things because of everything too that happened with the pandemic, remote learning and whatnot. Now all of a sudden there's this sense about flexibility and being able to essentially, as you were talking about, this type of choose your own adventure as far as for how do you want to be able to learn, and for us to be able to meet the learners where they actually are. For the blended learning approach, was that one of the recommendations as far as for what we can do to try to fully modernize everything? Or is it more about you think it should go in this direction, but you also once again understand that it may not be feasible for all with all the different types of parameters you just mentioned about?
Right. Well, the primary consideration in going with blended learning, and by blended learning, I'm using Barbara Means to her 2013 kind of meta-analysis as like the baseline, which is like, I forget the number of studies she looked at, but and she did a follow up later too. But the conversation has been falsely characterized as online versus face to face. But either of those conditions will get you a learning outcome and improvement in learning. But it's when both are combined and you get the benefits of both modalities where you're going to get a learning outcome that exceeds both either just face-to-face or online. And so we took that to heart and we said, well, why are we picking? Let's just use both. For us, it looks a little bit more structured. And I'm looking forward to the day where we can make it a little bit more tailored, but it's really just your online asynchronous component up front. That's your remembering, understanding when it comes to blooms, like get your baseline level of knowledge in before you go into the classroom. And then when you get to the classroom, which the Army has paid a lot of money to move your family there, get you set up and put instructors in the classroom for you. Let's not waste time with lower level learning objectives. Let's get right into the application, type of task. So we take blended learning in that kind of like phased manner, which is, in my view at least, just the first step. That was kind of like giving someone the Flintstone vitamin. Like, okay, like let's get used to doing the online first and then the face-to-face later. But that's not the ultimate end goal, I think, as far as where things will end up going. Because what I've just described isn't very tailorable at all. It's like do all your online stuff first, then do all your face-to-face stuff later. Still kind of linear, but it's an improvement.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I know too, because I've had quite a few courses that were also this type of a blended learning model. One of the things I really do love about that is that the engagement from all students with different types of approaches like that, because you have some of the students who are more comfortable with being online, some of the students who are more comfortable with talking about things as far as for in person or whatnot. And then when you eventually bring everybody back together to be able to have this, all of a sudden you start to realize where it's this like, oh, these people are actually interacting behind the scenes. So now when I'm actually having the in-person courses or the, synchronous courses with today's day and age of 2023, well, now all of a sudden when I put people into groups, now it's much more conversational. They start to know one another. They're forming those relationships. And now it's not so much about like, all right, kids, I'm putting you into a breakout room. Introduce yourselves and let's go. It's like, it's not the best way of doing things. So I totally agree with you and for all your points about that. What were some of your other recommendations though, as far as for we're trying to be able to modernize the type of course and what direction do you think it should be trying to take?
Yeah, I think so. I use like the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiatives framework for like the future, learning ecosystem, which sounds very fancy, but there were 6 dimensions of kind of what a learning environment, at the system scale would look like. It's like tech infrastructure, design, human infrastructure, like et cetera, et cetera. And so because of time, right? Like we basically got the mission and we put it out within 1 fiscal year, which for us is a very fast movement. Like we really only made changes to a few things. We created a whole lot of SCORM compliant courseware. We got a whole course infrastructure set up for it. We changed all the curriculum to reflect that. We reallocated time so that, the savings that we got in time by reallocating those to online type of modalities, we put it back on the schools so that they can get deeper into their things. So kind of like the first 2 levels of change, we really made some changes. What remains are some of those kind of higher systemic changes that we can make to the course. For example, like really, really, really enabling the learner to not just do something in a predefined sequence, but giving someone some choice on what content, to the extent of what content, and really tailoring instruction, both the content of it, the modality of it, and the extent of it, depending on kind of their prior knowledge. That is like the next step at the content level. And at the system level for us, it's about infrastructure, human infrastructure as far as talent for instructional designers and instructional system specialists, whatever, learning engineers, whatever terms you want to throw in there, people that are smart with technology and education to really set up an infrastructure that enables that. Because I can talk about it all day. I can visualize it all day at the individual developer level, but if the system doesn't have the affordances to do that, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, makes sense. I love that andragogy is basically like what you're referring to, by the way, inside of there, for being able to allow the flexibility, the autonomy, the choice, right. Everything from Dr. Knowles' work which actually is crazy. Andragogy started back in the 60s. It still is like, and we still barely use it today. And I'm like, gotta do more.
Gotta do a little more than that.
Yeah. More thinking about the adult learner here. So that was awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. It is extremely interesting for all of your work that you've done with this, and for all the folks who are listening at home. Go down into the show notes, and you can read more about Elvin's latest publication, talking all about this process in far more detail. I know you just kind of went over a few of the things for the basics and whatnot, but it goes into far more details that for any learning nerds out there would find it extremely interesting, as I did, where I was like, ooh, what is this? Like, what do you mean we're going into this? So really interesting stuff. So definitely be sure to read that if you can. With thinking about modernizing everything, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the future, and also like the future of instructional design, and also with the military, because obviously right now we keep on talking about AI. We're talking about a number of different things. I'm kind of curious, what trends do you see emerging in between these fields and coming together?
Oh, so many thoughts on this one. I'll keep it to 3 or less. because I know you don't have 3 hours for this podcast.
Hey,
So,
what's fine.
yeah. I'll start with artificial intelligence. So, okay, the military, every time we look at these, I'm speaking to the military, me as a military member, right? So the institution, and most institutions that are smart, are going to look at a lot of these technologies and kind of almost observe, wait, and evaluate. There's a lot of hype around AI, and there's actually been a lot of AI work done for decades, right? And so when someone goes on LinkedIn or the internet's blowing up or we see all this stuff with OpenAI, we tend to be, I don't want to say skeptical, but we're I would say tactically patient, right? We don't have to make a decision on these technologies right now. However, we're observing them. That being said, like, I can see two cases. So case one, there's a traditional school, right? And there are a lot of people that think this way, and they're right to. They can make their arguments this way. Is every single education technology that has been released has been come out with fanfare and then collapsed. Like radio is going to change education. Film is going to change education. The computer is going to change education. 10, 20 years down the line, those technologies have had marginal impact or no impact. And so you would forgive the institutions, and the government for saying, okay, cool, we see this, like we're going to play with it. We're going to check it and evaluate it. That being said, my opinion after playing with technologies and talking to some people that are smart about it is that it's generative AI, large language models, these type of technologies are going to have a qualitative impact that is not going away. For instructional designers, military instructional designers, we really have two options. We can either one, like act like it's not happening, like keep going and don't change our processes, and then, see what happens. Or the smarter thing is, and I think people in government are realizing this, is it's time to lean in. It's time to, no longer do you need to kind of take the technological pieces of your job and just hope they go away. Like, it's about time where instructional designers in any field, but particularly in the military, like lean in and actually learn how these technologies work versus being a passive user of them. Understanding the tokenization, understanding how these patterns are generated, understanding what outputs are realistic, fact checking it when the system doesn't produce an output that you don't want. It's going to be the skill set that's going to differentiate whether you're of value and you're productive or whether you're replaceable. My belief. And so it'd be very smart for you as an instructional designer in any discipline to learn these tools in depth. I'm not saying be an AI systems architecture genius. I'm not saying be a programmer per se, but you have to speak the lingo. You have to know how to use the tools, and you have to know their limitations and the capabilities is what I would say. So that's AI.
All right, that's one. You said you had two. Two more, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I got them for days. So, so I would ask you, do you agree with that assertion? Or?
I do. And I've been talking about AI quite a bit about things as far as you should be cognizant about what AI can and what it can't do. You should obviously be skeptical. You should make sure that if you are like raising up that red flag to say, which many people are now talking about, like, oh, that produced a type of information that's not true, and like, oh, it cited this fake source, and it's whatever. At that point in time, I kind of feel like that's old news, that like we've all encountered that right away, or like, oh, okay. And now it's going to be talking more about AI from perspectives as far as you're not going to be able to escape it, which I think that is kind of scary. But it even came out today talking about with Zoom, as far as with their privacy policy, AI is now included inside of there. As far as for saying that if you are using Zoom and if they want to be able to use machine learning and AI in order to be able to take this information and make that a part of what it is that they're planning on doing in the future, it's literally in their policy now. So it's just like, if you use Zoom, congratulations, you're now introduced into the world of AI. And that's what I keep on thinking about more and more, is that I'm walking around the living room and I talk to Siri about a certain product, and all of a sudden now it's this like recommendation after recommendation because it learned about what I'm looking for, what I'm trying to be able to search about. So it's just going to keep on growing. And especially for instructional designers, it's getting to the basics as far as for with it can do pretty much whatever. But the whole point about it is that for me and with AI, it can do the very basics, but it also doesn't do things well. So as far as with designing learning experiences, you still need that person. You need that person who's a critical thinker, who's emotionally intelligent, who can actually take things piece by piece and dissect it and say like, oh, that doesn't make sense. Or like, oh, it didn't do that correctly. When I interviewed Devlin Peck the other day, we were talking about how AI is going to replace bad e-learning because it's easy to do. Because it's like, just done. And then it's out there. It's just like, yeah. And you look at it and you review it. And any educator or any trainer or any designer is going to look at it and be like, oh, that's not great. So yeah, it's going to accelerate that. But for anyone who actually truly does care about with students and with learning and trying to be able to really make these transformations, then I think this is going to be going in this whole different type of direction. So right. I have a healthy amount of seeing of all parties as far as for why it's not great, why it's amazing, and why there's folks in the middle who are like, I want to wait it out a bit and see where is this going to go. Like, I understand all sides of things, but it's just going to keep on getting introduced more and more into our lives until eventually, right now, but I bet if you and I both hold up our phones, we're not using a Nokia anymore. Right. Smartphones came and we're like, no, this is it. And you're like, guess I'm getting a smartphone. It's just like, that's how I feel about AI. It's like, well, guess we're going to use this more is what I think we're going to be going forwards in the future.
I mean, I remember reading articles in the Atlantic when they were like, Google was going to kill education.
Yes. Like, Ask Jeeves. Ask Jeeves is going to take down us all in 1997. Okay.
We're fine. But, it's really interesting. And this is the second of 3 points. So, instructional designers being scared about AI and this kind of like fear mongering that I think is probably unhealthy. My opinion, like, I think it forces the instructional design community and the educational community as a whole to reckon with what it is that they're, what is it that you provide? Now that a tool can do the technical work, right? Because imagine a day, and this is within 10 years or less, I would say, my opinion. Interview me in 10 years. Is we put a lot of stock into like Captivate, Storyline, learning how to do front-end technologies and some of these things that like really feasible for, GPT 20 or whatever it's going to be to like do those things or generate a lesson plan for you, or translate that lesson plan into interactive website, on WordPress, whatever, like whatever platform that you think you're an expert in is going to be obviated by the fact that like this tool can do it quicker, faster than you. But to your point, it doesn't mean instructional designers are irrelevant. It just means what instructional designers do is different, and the value added is very specific. And I do a lot of my PhD studies on expertise. And so I'm positing that the future of instructional design is not, like 10 designers doing mediocre e-learning products, like pushing them at scale like an industrial model. It's about experts leveraging a lot of tools in small teams to create really high quality products. And the bar that you measure yourself against is, am I replicable? Can this AI produce the knowledge that I have? Like you're safe if you put in something that you're an expert on in this AI model, like, and it spits out an output and you're like, look, that's right. That's wrong. Oh my gosh. Concrete example. I know we've talked about this before, but like the Richard Mayer's Principles of Multimedia Learning, right? You go on ChatGPT, you're like, hey, what are the principles of multimedia learning? And it spits out 12. And then you go on LinkedIn and everyone's posting about 12 principles of multimedia learning. And you go on Google, but an expert knows that there's a book published in 2020.
Yep.
That Mayer himself published, that if you read it, has 15. And if you go to the Cambridge Handbook of Multimedia Learning, there's even more than 15. And so when you read the output, you're like, look, I know more than this system because I provide something more than just an algorithmic tokenized output of whatever humans used since before 2021. Like I have critical thinking and a deep knowledge of learning sciences, um, and I could do my own research, you know. And I think that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot with instructional designers is if you're going to use words like learning sciences, if you're going to, talk about education, then you kind of need to be theory based. You kind of need to be able to do your own fact checking, and you need to be smart enough and smarter than an AI, or you're replaceable.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense. It's not so much that you can just become an ID overnight, which I feel like because of social media, people start to like kind of be like, it's easy. Like,
Right.
you can just do it. I'm like, hold on a second. Like, no, it's not as easy as that. One example I wanted to actually piggyback off of and to go into it because like this blew my mind, and I bet it's going to blow your mind as well too. Have you followed a YouTuber before named Shalma NYC? Does that name sound familiar at all?
No, but I'm very curious to hear.
So he became a social media superstar on YouTube because he went viral with his videos, and every video started off with basically white guy surprises these people because he speaks like X language. So what happened is that he lived in Beijing for forever, so he can speak fluent Chinese. And all of a sudden now he goes into like Chinese restaurants, and he was trying to be able to see if he did something kind of silly, would people like talk behind their back, like in like their own natural language, and they would. And then the whole thing is that he'd be like, surprise, I can actually speak the same language. And he started to do that with not just Chinese, but with like so many different types of languages. And all of a sudden he kept on picking up more and more and more. And eventually his audience was this like, how are you learning these languages so quickly? Like you just learned about how to actually do Japanese or Spanish or for whatever it is. And he began to sell online courses and make tutorials about how to learn a language. And then eventually, once this whole AI explosion happened, he was wondering, could he essentially make an AI chatbot that would talk back with you using from OpenAI and trying to be able to correct you if you were, speaking about something in incorrect type of tense or whatnot. So he actually just released this. It's in this pilot version right now about this product. And sure enough, you can go and you can talk to this AI and it records your speaking, and then it will correct you whether or not, as far as for how you're actually speaking. But what's insane is that it's also adaptive. So even if you say, hey, I want to be able to learn about the basics of Mandarin, and you start speaking like that, but then all of a sudden you speak in English, well, then it's going to talk with you in English. Or if you become extremely proficient in Mandarin and you just go clearly into some technical words and whatnot, it can then repeat that and talk right back to you, and it understands your level. So the whole point about this was that you can now learn a language at home, essentially with a type of an AI tutor. But the point was not to replace language tutors or replace language instructors. The point was that you can then go and actually practice with essentially your laptop before going and talking with a person and feeling more comfortable, because of course learning a new language is extremely difficult. You have to be extremely vulnerable too, because you're going to mess up everything. And
Right.
as adults, we hate that. We don't want to you're being corrected, and you're like, I just could I be able to learn about at least the basics before actually going and talking with the person? And I think we can. Like it's getting there already. So that's this one thing that I'm like, okay, that's cool. I can see how this is going to work. So going back to your example about like it's elevating that, it's taking that to that next type of level as far as for everything. And yeah, that's where I think we're going.
I love it. And I love that example because it's not this like, the teachers are going to get replaced by the tutor. It's like, we're not designing one solution for one problem. You're doing multiple solutions to get everyone's learning outcome better. So it's like the AI plus the teacher plus going in the environment and getting practical experiences. Like that's a holistic way of thinking, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So no one's going to replace nothing like that, but it's just more about you want to be able to practice before doing it and trying to be able, because I know that if I could afford, because I tried to be able to learn Japanese 3 times. I failed 3 times miserably.
Hard
and
language,
I'm like,
yeah.
I was like, man, if I was able to actually go and let's say practice with this chatbot, 4 times a week, and then when I met with my tutor on Zoom, maybe then it would be better. I would feel more comfortable. I would have some more experience. And of course, not to mention too, the idea about, well, if it's going to be using with my laptop, if I want to practice at 4 a.m., I can. Like I can't always talk with my tutor at 4 a.m. That's not fair to him. So yeah. So being able to provide more about that flexibility and that autonomy, as we were talking about, but in a different way, is something interesting to think about.
Right.
So yeah.
If you're a teacher, why would you want to spend all your time teaching everyone the basics? There's more fun things to do, right? Like do the things that the computer can't.
Yeah, exactly. So that's recommendation 1. You said you said
well, I gave you two. Yeah.
Okay.
It was expertise. We talked about AI, and the third thing, and then I'm limiting myself to 3. So is interdisciplinarity. So like I don't know. I see all these conversations and we get really caught up in like the terminology and the scope and the whatever, but like the learning sciences is by nature an interdisciplinary field, that works with practitioners and researchers in every discipline, right? Neuroscience, educational policy, organizational management, whatever domain you're writing content for, like it's everything, like you're dealing with the emotions, you're dealing with the brain, you're dealing with the context, like it's such a tricky field, that's complex. And so what does this mean for instructional designers is I would love for the instructional design community to move from this, like, I'm going to learn this tool and I'm going to learn the things that ADDIE stands for. And I'm going to, pick 1 or 2 theories and then like lean on those theories for the rest of my life, into constantly growing, testing those theories, and then kind of expanding the range of thought that instructional designers are allowed to think about, right? Like you're not just a guy in the basement, lady in the basement, like cranking out e-learning and, what makes instructional design so great is you get to speak different languages. You get to speak the SME's language. You get to speak the language of like the educational folks. Then you get to speak technology. And putting those 3 things together is really powerful. Have you ever heard of a TPAC?
No, I think so.
Okay. It's really interesting. It was a model that Dr. Matt Kohler and Punya Mishra made about technology integration for teacher preparation. So it's not explicitly like an instructional design model, but I could see how it would apply to instructional designers. So TPAC, TPACK.
Yeah, I have it right now. Okay,
Yep. So it's for teachers at least, teachers have content knowledge, so about the thing they're teaching. They have pedagogical knowledge, which is about how to teach those things. Then they have technological knowledge, is about the technologies that they use in the classroom, right? And then the intersection of those create very specific things. So like pedagogical content knowledge is about how to teach specific, like content specific things. Like how am I going to teach this engineer how this widget works? Oh, I know the strategy how to teach that specific content thing. Technological, pedagogical knowledge is, how do I use this technology for these type of learning scenarios? Like, like writing, critique versus, more well-structured, and the intersection of those 3, are varied and complex. I would say that the instructional design community could probably look at a model similar to that to think about what it really means to be an instructional designer. Like it's about pedagogical knowledge. It's about content knowledge, working with your SME if you aren't the SME yourself. And then it's about the technology. It just manifests in different ways. And if you only rely on, one of those 3, you're kind of incomplete. You should be more well-rounded, right? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, totally. It totally does. And I'll put this in the show notes for people to follow too, because the visual also helped as you were explaining about that, and you did so well. But I think about with that and with instructional design, that isn't talked about enough are things that I call human skills, because that's when you have like the communication, the project management, the relationship management, as you were talking about with SMEs, of other different forms of stakeholders, with having make sure that you do have empathy inside of there and everything else as well. So it's like those are the things that we are not going to get replaced by either.
Right.
Like that's got to be in there somewhere. So when you're thinking about instructional design as a whole, that yes, as you mentioned, yes, there's the tech, but also yes, we have like the learning theories, but also you need to know too about how human beings operate and that they're not linear, which is like
Right.
what people seem to think when they come out of grad school or when they're reading more about with Addie and with backward design or with Sam, whatever. Any theory, model, process, whatever you want to be able to talk about, whatever you read about, and you're like, yes, but like here's instances where that didn't work, or when I had to pivot because all of a sudden, like when I talk about for some people when they ask about what's some type of a situation where you had to pivot and try to be able to figure things out. Well, hey, let's take trying to be able to develop courses when I was doing everything in person, and then boom, here's COVID. Mm-hmm. I'm like, cool. Now what? And there wasn't like we're gonna have some time to relax and wait. It was like, no, hey, let's figure this out. Let's get this thing set up, because we had a whole multimedia studio that we were filming people with, and all of a sudden now it's gone. But these people and their very valuable time of trying to be able to get them in the studio, I'm like, well, I'm not gonna say, hey, wait 3 months and come back. Like, right. I have a deadline. I gotta make sure to adapt here, and that's not in any model. Their process as far as for like, oh, there's a pandemic. What do? You know, it's just like, you're going to pivot. You're going to figure it out. And that's what we do. It's what we're really good at as far as our designers. Not just the learning nerd stuff, which we love, right. But it's also what do you actually do? You know? So, yeah.
Yeah. The effective ones, like I'm sure in your experience, like, you know, you may think you're an instructional designer and like, this is my box. I'm going to color my box, you know, like I'm going to do these tech things really nice or whatever. But like, you know, and you asked me like, what is a typical day? And I laughed about that question because, you know, that can get completely derailed by people, you know, and that's not an inconvenience or like a, you know, like a distractor. Like that's the whole point of the job. It's like, you know, like, does my product work for the people it's intended for? Do the people that are stakeholders, you know, also value my product? Are they going to support my product? And all those soft skills you mentioned, like you're dead in the water if you don't have support, if you don't have resources, and if it doesn't meet the needs. You can't do that in your cubicle. You're going to have to go talk to someone. You're going to have to make some phone calls. And like half your day, if not more, is just going to be interfacing with people and teams, because you forget, like, I mean, I don't know. And the government, at least, like I've never worked solo on a project. Like,
oh no, same way.
Yeah.
Same way. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is entirely a people first job. It's
100%.
The idea about someone being locked away in their basement, like you were saying, and they're just like working away and typing out, trying to make curriculum like that. And it's no, not at all. Like, no way, shape, or form. It's all about communication and hosting these meetings and check-ins and making sure that everything is running smoothly, and it never does. Something always pops up, some event, as you mentioned, that people will just come and like disrupt your day. And yeah, if I get one email that's all of a sudden an SOS, this is broken, or this happened, or we got this, and it's like, well, then there's my day. Gonna need to try to fit that in with all my other meetings, and then kick what I need to do down the road to try to fit. Yeah. It's entirely a people first type of a job. Right. So I'm glad we're talking about this, because I feel like anyone who's currently listening to this show who are currently instructional designers are probably nodding their heads the whole time to be like, yeah, like I never have a moment to myself. Like it's not true at all.
Which I worry about, you know, like there's a big theme, right? Like I'm a teacher, yes. I'm in this field, and, you know, like I got to get away from these people. Like I want to, you know, maybe someone thinks they're going to be freelancing and having, you know, that's certainly possible. But the majority of the jobs you're going to see, or, you know, at least at scale, are going to be, there's people there too. And it's just a different type of relationship.
It is. And I feel for all our teachers out there. They've been absolutely pummeled and crushed.
100%.
So it's like, I completely understand the entire wave of people saying, this is new, this is different. I can take some of my skill set, I can build to it. Maybe this can be a whole new chapter. And it's like, yeah, totally. But once again, as you know, as you and I have been talking about, it's still a job. Like it still has its pros and its cons. You'll always have your good days and your bad days. And like, yes, you and I clearly love what we do. Like, obviously,
right.
But at the same time, not to say like this is a perfect every single day that I wake up and I'm like, yes, like another perfect 9 to 5 every single day. It's like, oh no, you'll get some super challenging SMEs. You'll get some things where you're like, why is this happening? Or something will come down from leadership and you're like, okay, guess I'll figure this out. Like it's never perfect. For the most part, There's definitely more positivity to end on that note to make sure I don't just scare half our audience here. The most part, I am very happy, obviously, or else I wouldn't be having an instructional design podcast. So, kind of need to be able to put that plug in there. But once again, cons to every job.
Right.
So, yeah, you gotta think about that. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Elvin, and make sure that I don't take up even more of your time, because I know we're already going to be approaching the hour here for things. You mentioned a bit about how you transition over into this field. I have been seeing so many job postings, though, for instructional designers within the government, and also from every type of branch I can think of, too, by the way. I have seen postings from, obviously, the Army, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, the DoD, and then I've even seen types of learning design positions for the FBI, which I was like, okay, gotta be the coolest job ever to say that you're a learning design manager for the FBI. I'm like, all right, that's pretty sweet, but how does a civilian transition over into this kind of role? Because we always talk about higher ed, we always talk about corporate, but this, as you just mentioned, all of those people, the government agencies, there's so many people, there's obviously so many jobs. How does someone work their way over into that type of area? Any tips you can share with us?
Sure. And I'm not a hiring expert, so like if you really want to get into the details of how each step of the hiring process works for a civil service job, like happy to field the request and then send it to the appropriate individual. But this is how it works. So you go to usajobs.gov, right? And then there's a lot of codes you could put on the search on the top left. You put in 1750. So every job series in the government has a code. 1750 is a code for instructional system specialist. When you put that code in the query, every single listing for a government instructional system specialist job will show up. You click the link, it'll give you by-line descriptions of what the requirements are for the job, which is federally mandated. It has to be open and competed for. And then you essentially follow the instructions, right? Here's a difference that people need to understand with the government jobs. It's very literal. If they say X amount of months of this educational, qualification, if it says experience in X, like they're looking for that keyword in your applications. And you should reference that word in your application because there's two parts of the screen. The first part of the screen is going to be someone that's not an instructional designer, that's just checking that your application meets the minimum requirements for that listing, right? A lot of people get screened out on that point because simple case mismatch. The application said this, we didn't see that word in there, we screened it out. Of the remaining applicants, then they will go to the next phase where someone that's actually an instructional system specialist or a related field is going to pick the best candidate out of that pool. So first step, find what's there. Step two, look at yourself, see where your qualifications are. If you have a gap in the qualifications, like work to meet that skill gap. Get the training, get the education, talk to the hiring manager, get some tips, see other people on LinkedIn in the same field. And then once you meet that skill gap, apply. Government hiring can be frustrating in the beginning. It's not a business hire. Because of federal rules, it's going to take some time and, it's just going to be that way. But if you weather that storm, what you get on the other side is unprecedented stability, right? Like government work that is salaried for very competitive jobs that are guaranteed. A couple of things you're going to get. One, if that job gets canceled, the government is going to try to fill you with another job within the government, which is a lot. That's other departments, right? You can be in the Department of the Army and, your position in 2025 gets cut. They'll send you to the Department of the Interior. They'll send you to Department of Agriculture. Like it's a huge, huge, huge field that you're never going to lack for a job in. It's just getting in the door is a big thing. And then second, 40 hours mandated work time because of the law. Like a lot of the, when you're in higher education, when you're in, the corporate world, like you work to what the contract says and you do what you have to do to survive and be competitive. One of the blessings about government work is it's 40 hours and you can actually spend time with your family and have that off your back and just focus on doing quality work for a very good cause, which is the American people. And if you're in one of the services for soldiers, sailors, airmen, et cetera. So highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. Not enough people know about it.
They really don't. That's why I wanted to ask you, because it never comes up. I always hear, Luke, I want to be an instructional designer, higher ed, or like I'm thinking about corporate. And I can tell you the amount of times on one hand, as far as for people saying, but what about, and then sure enough, I actually heard from someone who I'm trying to bring on the podcast who's over in the Coast Guard, and she's loving it. Absolutely dream job. And it's just like, awesome. Like, yes, talk about this more. So, yeah. Makes sense. Well, Elvin, thank you so much for being here. I'm realizing that we're trying to be able to strive for the longest podcast episode together, I think, because we're already over the hour, which is pretty cool. But no, once again, thank you so much for being here, for sharing everything. I'm going to 100% include all the show notes for all the different types of things we talked about for today. Where can folks go to learn more about you, your work, and everything else, though? Where can they connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. So linkedin.com/Elvin Fortuna. Simple search there. And simple email too. So email's easy. elvinjfortuna@gmail.com. I'll respond to everything. So if you got a question about anything here, I will respond. I don't get that many emails, so this should be pretty easy.
You don't get any emails yet? Yeah. Just open up the floodgates, man. Yeah, no, awesome. Well, Elvin, once again, thank you so much for being in the podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate you having me.
A big thank you to Elvin for coming on the show. I told you it's going to be an awesome episode, and it was. Elvin was fantastic. I loved hearing more about everything from his journey, talking about the Army University, what they're up to. It just was a fascinating episode. And of course, if you have not yet connected with him, as he just said a couple of seconds ago, be sure follow him on LinkedIn. He posts some fantastic things about instructional design, latest of research, everything about the Army University, what they're up to. So, hey, be sure to follow him. Also, speaking about following, if you have not yet done so, be sure to subscribe to this podcast, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you are listening. And of course, if you would be so kind, give it a 5-star rating wherever you are listening to this show. I read every review, and of course, it greatly helps out the show the more that you give this a different form of rating and review, and of course, sharing as well. Be sure to share it with a friend and share it with your network. Always appreciate it. Always appreciate the kindness and the generosity from the Learning Nerd community. But hey, folks, that's all I have for you. Thanks so much once again for being here. And of course, stay nerdy out there. Talk to you next time.